Hi, and welcome back to another episode of The Fighter. We're going to hit the ground running with tonight's discussion. And so, what I'd like for everyone to do in your groups is to pull out your Bibles. We're going to read a section of Scripture in Luke chapter 15. In this passage, Jesus tells one story with three parts. Now, he was accused of a lot of different things in his ministry, but tonight we're going to see how he was accused of eating with and hanging out with some sinners and some tax collectors. Let's read this passage together and then continue tonight's discussion. I'm not sure what observations you made from reading those three stories. It's just interesting to me, though, that these very people that were accusing Jesus of eating and hanging out with tax collectors and sinners were within earshot when Jesus tells these three stories. It's like he wanted them to hear these on purpose. And I noticed that in these stories, there were three common denominators. First, something valuable was missing. Secondly, that missing item was valuable enough that it warranted an all-out search. And third, when they found the missing item, it was cause for a great celebration. When have you lost something that's been very valuable to you? Talk about that sense of urgency that you had of finding that lost item. Talk about some of those emotions you feel after you had misplaced it. Why don't you talk about that in your groups as we begin tonight's discussion? I don't know what you mentioned when you answered that first question. You might have mentioned some things like keys. You know, you can't drive your car without keys, can't get in your house without keys, so those are pretty valuable. You might have thrown something like that out, or maybe a cell phone. I know that my daughters would freak out if they misplaced their cell phone for even 5 minutes. But for my wife and I, the answer to that first question is a little bit more personal. There was a time early on in our marriage, right after our first daughter had been born, where we were at a major water park event for our youth ministry at CCV, and we had lost our daughter. And it was one of those instances where she thought that I had her and vice versa, and we got back together and realized that our daughter was gone. She wasn't with either one of us. And I'm telling you what, we panicked. I got sick to my stomach. My wife and I were both frantic. We were going and talking to everyone that we could find. Have you seen our daughter? We went up to the front gate and asked them to shut down so that no one would be able to get out until we found her. And I just can't tell you this sense of agony that we were in for even 5 minutes. Thankfully, one of the girls in our youth ministry had just happened to see our daughter there. She took her to another side of the park. She brought her back within 5 minutes, and it all came to nothing. But that was the longest 5 minutes of our lives. Now, I want to throw out a statistic. 85% of this valley will spend eternity without Jesus Christ. They will spend eternity without ever finding the Savior. Friends, what type of urgency does that statistic create? Are we sick at our stomachs? Are we frantic? Are we going around engaging all of our friends, our family members, our neighbors, and trying to help them find Jesus Christ? I think that's why Jesus told that story. It mattered to him that much that he would share those stories in Luke chapter 15. That's where I want to begin tonight's discussion. Will you fight for eternity? And that brings me back to this grill. There's nothing special or significant about this barbecue grill. In fact, the truth is you can pick one of these up for like $150 at Walmart. And most of us have a grill of some kind or another, probably just decorating our backyards. But a grill used in a block party at the end of the street, probably most people wouldn't give it a second thought. You know, walk down, grab some food with your neighbors, get to meet a few new people. Great times all around. But for one man, the encounter that he would have at a neighborhood barbecue would radically change his eternity. Tonight, you're going to be challenged to fight for eternity.
My name's Tanu Tumavangsa, and I'm a fighter. I met Dave at a neighborhood cookout, and he came out one night, and we were just eating and talking and got to meet some of the neighbors, and he was one of them.
We kind of started talking about sports and soccer and tennis and golf, kind of all the things that we had similar interests in.
At the time, the soccer league was going on, the neighborhood soccer was about to start, and I asked Dave to join us.
I said, sure, why not? You know, I had been involved in soccer forever, and I wanted to get re-engaged, not knowing what I was getting myself involved in.
At that time, Dave, from what I've heard him say, he didn't want to have anything to do with Christians, hadn't been to church in about 7-8 years or so since he was a teenager. He was not a Christ follower.
I grew up in a semi-religious household. There was very little consistency, and we kind of considered ourselves Creaster, really. We would go on Christmas and Easter, and that was it. So I was raised in the Catholic household with, I guess, somewhat of the morals and foundation that the faith is built on. But we really weren't all that practicing. My mom was the spiritual leader of the household, and my dad was just kind of there as, I guess, physical support. Didn't practice communion, any of that. So it was kind of interesting because my mom was a spiritual leader. And my mom passed away when I was 14, and that kind of rocked my world because obviously, I mean, losing a parent is extremely tough. And from a spiritual standpoint, she was kind of the foundation, and losing that foundation, you know, I completely strayed away from it.
I remember the question I asked him was pretty blunt. It was over coffee before one of our soccer practices. I asked him, so what's your faith story? What's your background with with church in general.
So it wasn't that I was an atheist, but I knew there was something out there. I just didn't really, I guess, grasp onto it. You know, it was difficult for me to accept it the way everything worked out with my mom. So I didn't really want to worry about it until it was brought up. And I guess Tanu kind of brought that to light, like, hey, you know, this is real, man. You need to consider this. You don't want to, I guess, look back on these years and have nothing to show for it from a spiritual standpoint.
When Dave thought about Christians, he's always told me that his issue with Christians were that they were not real. That they were always hiding something, and he had a hard time trusting them, and he just never had a good, honest experience with Christian guys or anyone associated with the church. Dave started noticing that there was something different about the guys he was hanging out with. I think what he saw from a lot of the guys that played on the team is he just saw that we were normal guys, you know, with real day jobs and just normal dudes that he could relate to.
The world has this impression that Christian men are soft, and I truly think that is the most untrue thing or comment that can be made. And yes, they do have a soft heart and an open heart, but that doesn't mean that their demeanor all the time is that way. Real jobs, real opportunities, real things like that, where they are real people.
We'd been hanging out for a year, and when we were during the off season, I would just hang out with Dave, and there were times where I didn't want to ask him anything spiritual, and we just kind of hung out and golfed and just did life, had dinner, you know, together. So I was trying to think of a way to hang out more with Dave, and you know, for guys, it's where else would you hang out but on a golf course where you have, you know, 4.5 hours together in a golf cart. So I thought it'd be a good idea to go out and golf, and I thought of a couple of guys from our soccer team. One of them is my friend Tony. I thought would connect well with Dave. And so they were paired up in the cart together, spent that whole afternoon together, and Tony was able to share his story with Dave.
My role, it seemed bigger looking back in hindsight than it really was. In my mind, it was just having small, simple conversations, causing him to think from a biblical perspective. I know from one of our conversations, I actually asked him, where are you at with God? And I think that really, if you boil that question down, it's a very tough conversation or a very tough question for somebody to pose to you. Because that question leads to another question or another series of questions. And I think that's what the big question was when we were on the golf course is where are you at with God? Throwing the question to him and just waiting for a response. Because I could actually see him just kind of pause and go, wow, you know, I never thought about that. And I truly have to say that wasn't a question that Tony came up with, as it was one of those questions that God truly had a hand in that question. Because the entire time when I was driving to that course, I knew that it was going to be he and I. So I had prayed, God, give me the questions to ask him. So that was just the thing of going, okay, well, here we go, God. You know, we're here. It's just going to be he and I for a couple of hours having that great exchange. So that's what caused me just to say, you know what? I have this opportunity. I mean, unless he wants to walk for the remainder part of the round, it's going to be he and I in this golf cart. We're going to have to get back to those questions. So that's the part that made it, okay, here we go. Let's fire the shot and see what happens.
So after the round, Dave just told me about how enjoyable that round was, and I think that's the part he started to realize that his story is not so different from other Christ followers' story. And I think from that moment, he started to trust a lot of the guys that we hung out with.
Over time, our friendship grew into something a little bit more than where I could trust him and he could trust me with, you know, I guess some sensitive questions that, you know, I guess just acquaintances can't, you know, or conversations that acquaintances just can't have. That was the real, I guess, catalyst to, you know, moving forward spiritually.
At the times where we weren't talking about spiritual things, we were just hang out with him like regular people would.
I remember when I first told Tanu, like, hey, I'd be interested in like attending church, and because we had talked about spiritual things, but I was really, I guess, hesitant to get back involved. And I said, dude, like, look, I'd like to go. He had been talking about serving with the kids and being involved with the youth. And I remember sitting on his couch and telling him that, and then after that, actually going to church. And I felt this like overwhelming sense of belonging and wanting more. I felt really emotional and like, wow, this is kind of what I had been missing out on, because for so long I had felt like an empty pit in my stomach that, there's something more to this than just working and just being, So I guess the turning point was just when I accepted that, this is worth a shot.
We were just having lunch at my house, and I'll never forget the day where Dave said, I think I'm ready to learn more about this Jesus. When he told me that, I wanted to get up and hug him, but I didn't. It just made me realize that God had been working this whole time through all of that, even when Dave didn't even know, even when Dave said that he didn't want to have anything to do with church people. And turns out, we just hung out with him, and we were just real with him. And it feels like he just came to realize that himself, that something was missing. It was nothing that we could, give him. It was something that he had to find himself. When he started serving with Stars, I think it's when things started changing a lot for him. And I think one of the turning points for him was the story of Joel. Was one of our high schoolers that had a brain aneurysm right on the practice field. Later that night, Joel was taken to the hospital, and we all drove out there. We met the family there, and Dave was the first one to break the ice with the family. I mean, he was walking around the room, talking to the parents, just letting them know exactly what happened that night. And he was a lot more comfortable than I was. And you would have thought he was the pastor. He was the one that did the hospital visit. He was the one that was extremely at ease that night with the parents. And we all went into the hospital room, and we took turns and prayed, and there was about 5 or 6 of us. And we didn't plan on who was to start, who was to end the prayer, but Dave closed us. And Dave prayed this prayer that was extremely heartfelt. The prayer was so real, and it was so honest, and it went something like, God, you have to heal Joel because you are who you are, and Joel is not finished here. It was a prayer that I'll never forget. It was a prayer that made me remember that, we should all pray that way. We should flat out ask God for a miracle, and Dave wasn't shy to do that. And that's when I first realized that something had totally changed in his heart. That he understood God now. Joel now recovered, and is back on our soccer team this season.
That completely rocked my world, man. That was insane to think that like this kid, like on our watch, is like struggling for his life, and to see what kind of like all of our kids coming together and praying for him, and everything that CCV did for the family, and it was just an incredible thing, and to know that God was looking out for him and to make such a speedy recovery, and considering the circumstances, is absolutely phenomenal. I made a commitment kind of to myself without the outward commitment of being baptized, and I knew what I wanted. It was one of those things where I guess selling myself out and letting everyone know was a little bit difficult to me, because I'll be honest, I'm sure a lot of people would be surprised if I told them my story, specifically people back in Illinois where I'm from. So I had a little bit of a struggle with like saying, hey, look, this is it, man. This is the new me that you're going to have to accept.
We talk about baptism, and he had been thinking about getting baptized for, I'd say about a couple months. And it wasn't until Christmas time that, I called him up and I said, when are we going to do it? And he says, you know what, let's just do it this week. What do you have open? And I said, what do you have open? And he says, well, I'm working this whole time, but I have Christmas morning open. And I said, awesome, so we could baptize you on Christmas morning? And he says, all right, let's do it. So we set that up, 10 o'clock, Christmas morning. We were all there, it was about 40 degrees outside. And we baptized him.
It was so great because every other year we spend time with our families, but when we knew that Dave was getting baptized, we cleared everything out, and it was just about being there for that moment. And it was awesome. It was awesome to see Dave make that transformation, that change to put God first and to put himself, further down the line. So it was really, really life-changing.
Obviously, I was a little bit nervous. I didn't really know what to expect. I wasn't sure if I was going to have this, again, that overwhelming feeling of like, a spiritual connection. But it was cool because I knew like I had a fresh start. I was going to kind of start over, and what better day to do it than on Christmas. And very anxious, I was worried because it was super cold. And Tanu set everything up for me, and it was awesome. I really couldn't thank him enough. And I remember texting him, dude, thank you so much. This means the world to me. And his response was, it wasn't me, man. So that kind of was awesome to think that he doesn't want any of the credit. He knows where the credit's due.
It was the best Christmas I can remember so far, honestly.
One of the things that my father-in-law told him when they were there at the baptism was how he kind of set in motion a change for my entire family's lifestyle, really. I mean, my wife is expecting, so my father-in-law Jeff said, hey, please understand what you've done for my family, and not only me, David, but also her. And that was incredible to think that he has such a powerful influence towards me and mentorship qualities that it could influence not only me, but my entire family.
Isn't that a great story about how one man helped his buddy find Jesus Christ? It's just incredible, the chain of events that sometimes God will use to alter someone's eternity. You notice the different similarities too with what we read earlier in Luke chapter 15? One, something valuable was missing. Secondly, the item that was missing was cause for an all-out search. And third, finding that missing item was cause for a great celebration. That's what happened with Tanu and Dave. And what I want to ask right now is just this. Which part of that list do we often miss when it comes to helping someone else find Christ? Maybe it's the fact that we're not often at the finish line and celebrating with those who've just come to know Christ, or maybe participating in baptisms together. Maybe it's the fact that we're not meeting things with the sense of urgency that perhaps Jesus would want us to when we're helping the lost become found. Why don't you talk about those three items and which part we're missing when it comes to fighting for eternity? Man, I just love to see what happens when someone comes to know Jesus Christ for the very first time. And it's great to see this chain of events that led to Dave getting baptized on Christmas Day. Chances are, there's some people in the room with you right now, they've got some pretty cool stories themselves. What we thought we'd do for the next few minutes is just take this opportunity to hear some of your conversion stories. How did you come to know Jesus Christ? What was the catalytic chain of events that helped change your eternity? Let's share some of those for the next few minutes. Now, I know what some people might be thinking as they listen to a story like the one that we featured today. You might be saying, well, that's great for them. I'm really glad that it worked out for Tanu. I'm really glad that Tony was able to be as influential as he was, and that year's investment that they spent on Dave was able to pay off, so to speak. I'm really excited for Dave and for the changes that he's making in his life. That might be one reaction. But I think a lot of people out here are thinking, you know what? I've been praying for my wayward son or daughter for 5 years or 10 years, and I still haven't seen any results. Or I've lived on my street next to the same neighbors for 15 years, and I put them on my list every time they ask me to think about this. And those people are no closer to Jesus Christ now than they were when I first moved in. In other words, sometimes we're spending all this effort and we're still not seeing any fruit from our labor. What I want us to talk about in our groups is this. How does this story give you hope as you fight for eternity for someone else? How does it encourage you? How does it help you keep fighting? Let's talk about that for the next few minutes. Well, we hope you've been inspired in tonight's episode of The Fighter. And we hope by now you can see that God can use any weapon in making an impact all around this valley. You know, tonight he used a barbecue grill to help Tenu reach his friend for Jesus Christ. And we hope that in some way this has given you hope to continue to fight for eternity. Now remember these three common denominators that we gleaned from tonight's stories? In every single story, something valuable was missing. It warranted an all-out search, and it was cause for a great celebration. Our takeaway tonight is this: we want you this week to fight for eternity. What that might mean is, first of all, you pray for those opportunities before you to say, God, give me that chance to be a good example for you. Give me the name of someone. Impress upon me the desire to want to help someone take that next step in their adventure towards you. Maybe that's the first thing that you can do. Secondly, maybe some of you were convicted tonight because you've never acted on that first prompting that God has given you. And so it's time for an all-out blitz, a search, just like we learned about in tonight's discussions. And so let's pray for that as well, that God will convict us to step out of our front door and act on what he wants us to do. Third, maybe we haven't been doing enough celebrating. I want to challenge your group. If you really want to have a fresh perspective of this, why don't you attend the next baptism at a campus near you? Maybe it's been a while since you've experienced what it's like for someone to find Jesus Christ for that first time and to see that look of joy that they have on their face as they come out of the water after getting baptized. Man, is it an experience like no other? And so what we'd like for you to do is to go to a baptism. Attend that as an entire group. Celebrate that with these complete strangers that are coming to know Jesus Christ. And better yet, why don't you go around and pray with them after they've made their decision? This will be a blessing to them, and it's certainly going to be a blessing to you. Why? Because it reminds us that eternity is worth fighting for.